Hundreds of people passed me that night. Only one stopped. I did not know it then, but the sound of rain against the library windows was the last ordinary thing I would hear before my life changed forever. My name is Emily Carter, and for 25 years I had convinced myself that surviving and living were the same thing. That night taught me how wrong I was. The city library closed at 9 o'clock every evening. By 9:15, the last staff members had gone home. The lights inside faded one section at a time until only the security lamps remained. Usually I loved those quiet moments. The silence felt peaceful after a long day of helping visitors find books, answer questions, and navigate problems much bigger than misplaced novels. But that evening felt different. The rain had started before sunset and only grew heavier as the hours passed. Water streamed down the large glass windows overlooking the parking lot. Streetlights reflected across the pavement like blurred gold ribbons. I sat alone beneath the covered entrance and watched the storm. My jacket was soaked despite the shelter overhead. My hair clung to my face. My hands would not stop trembling. Every few minutes, another car passed along the street. Headlights flashed through the darkness before disappearing again. Nobody slowed down. Nobody looked twice. I did not blame them. Cities teach people to keep moving, to mind their own business, to assume someone else will help. I had spent years doing the same thing. The strange part was that I was not waiting for anyone. At least that is what I told myself. I was simply sitting there because I did not know where else to go. Sometimes exhaustion becomes so heavy that even making a decision feels impossible. The rain continued falling. Minutes became an hour. The temperature dropped. My eyes burned from holding back tears that no longer seemed worth hiding. By then, I was too tired to care what anyone thought. A few tears mixed with the rainwater already covering my face. The city continued moving around me without noticing. Then I heard a different sound. An engine slowing down. I looked up. A black luxury sedan had turned into the nearly empty parking lot. It moved slowly across the wet pavement before stopping several yards away. The headlights remained on for a moment. Then they switched off. I expected the driver to realize the library was closed and leave. Instead, the driver's door opened. A tall man stepped into the rain. He wore a dark overcoat that seemed completely out of place in the storm. Most people would have hurried toward shelter. He walked calmly through the downpour as though the weather did not matter. I watched him approach with growing confusion. Even from a distance, there was something unusual about him. Confidence. Control. The kind of presence that changes the atmosphere around it. When he reached the entrance, he stopped several feet away. Far enough to respect my space. Close enough to see my face. For a moment neither of us spoke. Rain echoed across the empty parking lot behind him. Finally, his eyes met mine. They were steady. Observant. Impossible to ignore. Then he asked a question nobody else had bothered to ask all night. "Miss, are you all right?" And for reasons I could not explain, that simple question almost broke my heart. For a few seconds, I could not answer him. The question seemed so simple. "Are you all right?" Yet it felt impossible because I had spent so long pretending that the answer did not matter. Rain continued falling beyond the covered entrance. Water dripped from the edge of the roof in steady streams. The man waited patiently, showing no sign of leaving. Most people would have accepted the silence and walked away. He did not. "I am fine," I finally said. The words sounded weak the moment they left my mouth. His expression did not change. If anything, he looked slightly disappointed. Not in me. In the answer. "No," he said quietly. "You are not." I looked away. Normally that would have ended the conversation. Most strangers understand when they are being dismissed. This man seemed immune to social signals. He remained standing several feet away, hands relaxed at his sides, allowing me space while somehow refusing to disappear. "You do not know me," I said. "That is true." His voice remained calm. "But I know what someone looks like when they have been sitting alone in the rain for over an hour." Embarrassment immediately surfaced. Had it really been that long? I glanced toward the empty parking lot. The answer was obvious. Time had slipped away without me noticing. The stranger followed my gaze. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" The question tightened something inside my chest. Safe. Such a simple word. Such a complicated answer. I hesitated too long. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not with suspicion. With concern. That was not the answer I hoped for, he said. Before I could respond, another vehicle entered the parking lot. A dark SUV rolled to a stop nearby. Two men stepped out, both wearing dark coats despite the weather. They looked toward the stranger immediately. Respectfully. Professionally. One of them approached. Mr. Moretti, we should get moving. The name meant nothing to me at first. Then recognition arrived. Everyone in the city knew the name Luca Moretti. Business owner. Investor. Philanthropist. Rumors surrounded him constantly. Some people admired him. Others feared him. Nobody ignored him. My stomach tightened. The man standing in front of me noticed the realization in my eyes. That explains the expression, he said softly. I could not think of a response. Luca glanced toward the rain-covered street before returning his attention to me. Emily, I am going to ask you one more question. I blinked. How do you know my name? A faint smile appeared. He nodded toward the library employee badge still attached to my jacket. Heat rushed to my face. Luca continued before my embarrassment could grow. Will you allow me to buy you a cup of coffee? The request caught me completely off guard. Not because it sounded threatening. Because it sounded normal. Human. Kind. Things I had not expected tonight. Why? I asked. Luca looked toward the dark city beyond the parking lot. Then back at me. Because nobody should have to sit alone in a storm when they are clearly carrying more than rain. The words settled quietly between us. Something in my chest shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. And as the rain continued falling around us, I found myself considering an option I had not considered all night. Following the only person who had bothered to stop. I wish I could say I made the decision because I was brave. The truth is much less impressive. I followed Luca Moretti because I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of carrying everything alone. Tired of sitting in the rain waiting for circumstances to change by themselves. The coffee shop he chose was still open despite the late hour. Warm light spilled across the windows. The scent of fresh coffee and baked pastries greeted us the moment we stepped inside. After the cold rain outside, the warmth felt almost unreal. Luca selected a quiet corner table near the back. His security team remained outside. That detail did not escape my notice. He could have surrounded himself with people. Instead, he gave me space. A server brought coffee and tea without needing to ask what Luca wanted. Clearly, he was a regular customer. Once the drinks arrived, silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable silence. Patient silence. The kind that allows a person to breathe. I wrapped both hands around the warm cup and stared at the steam rising into the air. You do not have to explain anything, Luca said. Good, I replied. Because I am not planning to. To my surprise, he smiled. That is probably wise. I looked up. You are not going to ask questions? Not tonight. His answer caught me off guard. Most people became curious the moment they sensed a story. They wanted details. Explanations. Drama. Luca seemed interested in something else entirely. Then why bring me here? I asked. He glanced toward the rain outside the window. Because sometimes people need a place to stop running long enough to think clearly. The words landed harder than they should have. My immediate instinct was to deny them. To insist I was not running from anything. Unfortunately, I knew better. Luca appeared to know better too. For several minutes, we simply sat there while the storm continued outside. Eventually, I noticed him studying me again. Not staring. Observing. Like someone trying to solve a puzzle without forcing the pieces together. What? I finally asked. Luca leaned back slightly. You keep looking at the door. Embarrassment immediately surfaced. He was right. I had checked the entrance at least 6 times since sitting down. Habit, I said. Interesting habit. I sighed. You notice everything, do not you? His expression softened. Only the things people hope nobody notices. The answer silenced me. Suddenly I understood why lying felt impossible around him. It was not because he was intimidating. It was because he paid attention. Real attention. The kind most people never receive. A few moments later, my phone vibrated on the table. The sound startled me. I looked down at the screen and immediately felt my stomach tighten. The name displayed there erased every bit of comfort I had felt during the last hour. Luca noticed the change in my expression instantly. He did not ask whose name appeared. He did not reach for the phone. He simply watched me quietly. My hand hovered above the screen. The call continued ringing. Then it stopped. Relief washed through me. Briefly. Seconds later, another notification appeared. Then another. Then another. Luca's eyes moved from the phone to my face. For the first time all evening, his calm expression hardened slightly. "Emily," he said quietly. "That is not the reaction of someone who is safe." And for the first time, I could not bring myself to argue. The notifications kept appearing one after another. I did not open them. I did not need to. The growing number alone was enough to make my pulse race. Across the table, Luca remained perfectly still. The coffee shop continued operating around us. Cups clinked. Quiet conversations drifted through the room. Soft music played overhead. Yet, suddenly all of it felt very far away. "Emily," Luca said gently. "Look at me." I forced my attention away from the phone. His expression remained calm. Steady. Controlled. "You do not have to tell me everything." He paused. "But I need you to tell me the truth." For a moment, I stared at him without speaking. I wanted to repeat the same lie I had been repeating for months. "I am fine. Everything is fine. Nothing is wrong." The problem was that I no longer believed it myself. My shoulders slowly lowered. The fight required to maintain the illusion had finally become exhausting. "I have spent a long time trying to avoid problems," I admitted quietly. Luca nodded once. Not judgmental. Simply listening. "And did it work?" The question almost made me laugh. Almost. Not really. I did not think so. Silence settled between us again. Outside, rain continued sliding down the windows. I watched the lights from passing cars blur against the glass. Somewhere along the way, I realized I felt safer sitting across from this man than I had felt in months. That realization should have frightened me. Instead, it brought relief. My phone vibrated once more. This time I turned it face down. Luca glanced at the device before returning his attention to me. Then something changed in his expression. Not anger. Decision. The kind of look people get when they stop observing a problem and start solving it. Slowly, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed his phone. The movement seemed almost ordinary. Yet the atmosphere around the table shifted immediately. He unlocked the screen and selected a contact. "What are you doing?" I asked. Luca looked up. "Making a phone call." There was something about the way he said it that made the words feel heavier than they should have. He stood and stepped several feet away, giving me privacy even now. The call connected almost instantly. I could not hear the voice on the other end. I could only hear Luca. "Good evening." His voice remained calm. "I need a favor." A brief pause followed. "Tonight." Another pause. "Yes, I am certain." He listened for several seconds before continuing. Discreetly. Professionally. And immediately. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Then he ended the call and returned to the table. That was it. No dramatic speech. No threats. No raised voice. Just a quiet conversation. Yet somehow the room felt different afterward. I stared at him. "Who is that?" Luca picked up his coffee cup. "Someone who knows how to help." "Help with what?" A faint smile appeared. "That depends on what we discover." His answer created more questions than it solved. Before I could ask another one, he glanced toward the rain-covered window. "Emily, tomorrow morning. A few things may begin changing." My stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" Luca met my eyes. His expression remained impossibly calm. The kind that happen when somebody finally decides your situation deserves attention. And for the first time all night, I found myself wondering whether that single phone call might change far more than either of us had said aloud. The next morning felt strangely quiet. Not because the city had changed overnight. Because for the first time in weeks, my phone had not spent the entire night lighting up my room. I noticed it the moment I opened my eyes. Silence. Real silence. No missed calls. No endless notifications. No anxious feeling waiting for the next interruption. I lay there staring at the ceiling, almost afraid to believe it. Then reality returned. Luca's phone call. The memory immediately surfaced. Less than 30 seconds. A calm voice. A simple request. Somehow it had felt far more significant than it should have. By 8 o'clock, I was walking toward the library beneath clear blue skies. The storm had disappeared completely. Sunlight reflected from office windows across downtown. People hurried through their routines carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Everything looked normal. Yet, something felt different. When I arrived at work, my supervisor greeted me with an unusual smile. "Emily, there is someone here to see you." My stomach tightened instantly. The familiar anxiety tried to return. "Who?" She handed me a business card. The name printed across the front meant nothing to me. Attorney. Family Services Consultant. Community Advocacy Specialist. I looked up in confusion. Why would they want to see me? My supervisor shrugged. "They said they are here to offer assistance if you need it." Assistance. The word echoed in my mind. An hour later, a second visitor arrived. Then a third. None of them pressured me. None of them demanded information. Each simply introduced themselves and explained that resources were available should I ever choose to use them. Legal guidance. Housing assistance. Counseling services. Career support. The list seemed endless. By lunchtime, I felt completely overwhelmed. Not by fear. By disbelief. For so long, every door had felt closed. Suddenly people were handing me keys I had never known existed. After work, I found myself sitting on a bench across from the river trying to process everything. The city moved around me while questions filled my head. Then I noticed a familiar black sedan parked nearby. A moment later, Luca stepped out. He crossed the sidewalk and sat beside me without speaking. For several minutes, we simply watched the water. Finally, I looked at him. "You knew." A faint smile appeared. "About what?" I shook my head. "Do not do that." His smile widened slightly. "I enjoy doing that." Despite everything, I laughed. Then my expression grew serious again. "The attorney. The consultants. The people offering help." Luca nodded. "Yes. Your phone call." "Partly." I stared at the river. "How?" He remained quiet for a moment. "Emily, most problems survive because people feel isolated." His voice was calm. The moment isolation disappears, options appear. The answer sounded simple. Too simple. Yet I could not argue with the results. Luca looked toward the skyline. "Nobody can force you to accept help." He paused. "But someone can make sure help exists when you are ready." Emotion tightened my throat unexpectedly. For months, I had believed nobody noticed what I was carrying. Now I was discovering something entirely different. People had noticed. They simply had not known where to begin. Luca stood and adjusted his coat. "This is only the beginning." I looked up. "Beginning of what?" His expression softened. "Of you realizing how many people are willing to stand beside you once they know the truth." And as he walked back toward the waiting car, I realized the most surprising thing of all. The city had not changed overnight. I had. The first sign appeared 3 days later. It was small enough that most people would have ignored it. I almost did. I was shelving returned books in the history section when my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Normally, I would have deleted it immediately. Instead, something made me open it. The message was simple. "If you ever need assistance, call this number anytime." Beneath the text was the contact information for a counselor I had met earlier that week. No pressure. No expectations. Just an open door. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then I saved the number. Later that afternoon, another unexpected thing happened. A local community organization contacted the library about expanding literacy programs. They were offering funding, volunteers, and resources. My supervisor spent the entire day smiling. Everyone seemed excited. As conversations filled the building, I found myself wondering how many opportunities had always existed around me without my noticing. The thought stayed with me all week. So did Luca. Not because he constantly appeared. Quite the opposite. After our conversation by the river, he largely disappeared. No surprise visits. No endless phone calls. No attempts to insert himself into every part of my life. Somehow that made his presence feel even larger. He had opened doors and then stepped aside. The realization unsettled me because it felt so rare. Most people who offered help expected something in return. Attention. Gratitude. Loyalty. Luca seemed interested only in results. One Saturday afternoon, I finally saw him again. I was leaving a bookstore downtown when a familiar black sedan pulled up beside the curb. The passenger window lowered. "You look suspicious," I said immediately. Luca smiled. "That is a terrible greeting. You vanished for a week." "I was busy." "Doing what?" His smile widened slightly. "Being suspicious." Despite myself, I laughed. A few moments later, I found myself sitting across from him at a quiet outdoor cafe. The city bustled around us beneath bright spring sunlight. For a while we talked about ordinary things. Books. Travel. Food. The conversation felt surprisingly easy. Then something caught my attention. A man sitting at another table nodded respectfully toward Luca before leaving. Minutes later, a woman walking her dog waved at him from across the street. Then a restaurant owner stepped outside and greeted him by name. Everywhere we went, people seemed to know him. More importantly, they seemed genuinely happy to see him. "You are noticing something," Luca said. I looked at him carefully. "You are not who people think you are." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dramatic." "I am serious." I gestured toward the busy street. "People trust you." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he glanced toward the families walking through the park nearby. "Trust takes a long time to earn." His voice softened. "And about 5 minutes to lose." The answer stayed with me long after the conversation moved on. That evening, as I walked home beneath golden sunset light, another realization finally surfaced. During the last few weeks, I had been focusing on what Luca had done. The phone call. The resources. The support. What I had not noticed was something even more important. Someone had been quietly making sure I never had to face everything alone again. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt larger than my fears. The file arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. At first, I almost ignored it. The envelope looked ordinary enough. Plain cream paper. No company logo. No return address. Just my name written neatly across the front. I found it waiting at the library reception desk when I arrived for work. "Someone dropped it off this morning," my supervisor explained. "They said it was important." The moment I touched the envelope, a strange feeling settled in my stomach. Not fear exactly. Anticipation. By lunchtime, curiosity had become impossible to ignore. I carried the envelope to a quiet reading room on the second floor and carefully opened it. Inside was a thin file folder. Attached to the front was a single note. "Emily. Some answers are easier to face when you are finally ready to hear them. Luca." My pulse quickened immediately. I opened the folder. The first few pages contained records I recognized. Old housing documents. Employment forms. Archived correspondence. Nothing unusual. Then I reached a section that made me stop breathing for a moment. The papers described events from years ago. Situations I had only partially understood at the time. Decisions made behind closed doors. Conversations that affected my life without my knowledge. Piece by piece, a larger picture began to emerge. For years, I had blamed myself for opportunities that disappeared unexpectedly. Scholarships that never materialized. Promotions that stalled. Applications that seemed to vanish. I had always assumed I simply was not good enough. The documents told a different story. Several records showed administrative errors that had never been corrected. Recommendations that had never reached their destination. Requests that had been misfiled or ignored. None of it was dramatic. None of it involved conspiracies or villains. Just a long chain of neglect, indifference, and people taking the easiest path instead of the right one. Yet the consequences had followed me for years. I sat there staring at the pages as realization slowly settled over me. The problem was never that I lacked ability. The problem was that too many people failed to do their jobs properly. Emotion tightened my throat unexpectedly. Not anger. Relief. Relief that the story I had told myself for years was finally breaking apart. Later that evening, I called Luca. He answered immediately. "You read it." It was not a question. Yes. Silence lingered for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my mind all afternoon. "Why did you send this?" Luca's voice remained calm. "Because people cannot heal from things they do not understand." I looked out my apartment window toward the city lights beyond the glass. "You spent time finding all of this?" "Yes." "Why?" A longer pause followed. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded unusually thoughtful. "Because I wanted you to stop blaming yourself for things that were never your fault." The words hit harder than anything else I had heard all day. For years, I had carried responsibility for burdens that did not belong to me. Now, for the first time, I could see the difference. The file did not change the past. It did something more important. It changed the way I understood it. And as I sat alone in the quiet glow of my apartment, turning the final page, I realized the most valuable thing Luca had given me was not protection. It was clarity. A week after the file arrived, I finally asked the question that had been living in the back of my mind since the night we met. It happened during a quiet dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the harbor. The evening sky glowed orange and gold beyond the windows. Boats drifted slowly across the water. Soft piano music filled the room. Everything felt peaceful. Almost too peaceful. Luca sat across from me reviewing a document while I stirred my tea without drinking it. Eventually he noticed. Of course he noticed. "You were thinking too loudly again," he said. I smiled despite myself. "Is that a real thing?" "With you, yes." I shook my head and looked out toward the harbor. Then I finally asked it. "Why did you stop that night?" Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. When I looked back at him, his expression had changed. Something softer appeared behind the calm confidence he always carried. For several moments, he simply watched the sunset beyond the glass. "That is a difficult question," he said quietly. "I know." He nodded once. Then he closed the folder in front of him and pushed it aside. For the first time since I met him, he seemed less like a powerful businessman and more like a man remembering something he had spent years trying not to revisit. "When I was 14, he began, there was someone important in my life." I remained silent. Instinctively, I knew this was not a story he shared often. Luca's gaze never left the harbor. She was kind. Strong. The type of person who spent more time helping other people than helping herself. His voice remained calm, but I could hear emotion beneath it. Most people thought she was fine. A knot formed in my chest. I already knew where this story was going. Luca continued. The truth was very different. The restaurant seemed to fade away around us. I listened without interruption. She spent years carrying problems alone because she believed she was protecting everyone else. He paused. And because the people around her failed to notice what was happening. The sadness in his voice surprised me more than the story itself. Luca rarely spoke about emotions directly. Yet now every word felt personal. Real. "What happened?" I asked softly. For a moment he looked down at the table. Then he answered. "One day, people finally noticed." Another pause followed. But they noticed too late. My heart sank. Luca sat quietly for several seconds before continuing. "After that, I made myself a promise." His eyes met mine. If I ever saw someone carrying that same look, I would not pretend I did not see it. Emotion tightened my throat. Suddenly, everything made sense. The rain. The library entrance. The questions. The phone call. The file. None of it had started because of power or influence. It started because of a promise. A promise made years before we met. Luca's expression softened. "The night I found you outside the library, I recognized something." I looked down at my hands. "What?" His answer came immediately. Someone who had spent too long believing she was alone. Tears threatened to surface, but this time I did not try to hide them. Because for the first time, I finally understood the truth. Luca did not stop because he saw a problem. He stopped because he remembered what happens when nobody does. And sitting across from him as the sun disappeared beyond the harbor, I realized that one promise from the past had quietly changed both of our futures. The strange thing about life is that the moments that change everything rarely feel important when they happen. A conversation, a decision, a single phone call. Looking back, I could trace the beginning of my new life to less than 30 seconds spoken in a coffee shop on a rainy night. 3 months later, the city looked exactly the same. The streets were still busy. The harbor still reflected the evening lights. The library still opened at 9 o'clock every morning. Yet everything felt different because I was different. The first major change arrived when I accepted a leadership position for a citywide literacy initiative. It was an opportunity one would have rejected in the past. Not because I lacked the ability, because I lacked the confidence. Now, for the first time, I trusted myself enough to say yes. The program grew faster than anyone expected. Volunteers joined from every corner of the city. New reading centers opened. Families received resources they had never had before. Watching it happen felt surreal. One evening after a community event, I stood outside the new literacy center watching children leave with stacks of books in their arms. Their excitement was impossible to miss. Their future felt larger than their circumstances. The sight filled me with quiet gratitude. "You're smiling." I turned and found Luca standing beside me. Some things never changed. He still appeared without warning. He still noticed everything. I laughed softly. "I think I finally understand something." He raised an eyebrow. "Only one thing? Do not ruin the moment." A faint smile appeared. We watched the families disappear down the sidewalk. The evening air carried the scent of fresh rain from a distant storm. The memory immediately transported me back to the library entrance where we first met. Luca seemed to notice. "You were thinking about that night." It was not a question. "Yes." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I looked toward him. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." I took a breath. "Do you ever regret stopping?" The answer came immediately. "No." There was no hesitation. No uncertainty. Just certainty. I smiled. "Good." Luca studied me carefully. "Do you?" I looked around at the center. The volunteers. The families. The future that had once seemed impossible. Then I thought about the frightened woman sitting alone in the rain, believing nobody would notice if she disappeared into the darkness. It felt like remembering a different person. "Not even for a second," I said. The sun began setting behind the city skyline, painting the streets gold. Luca nodded once, satisfied with the answer. Then he reached into his coat and handed me a small envelope. I laughed immediately. Another mysterious file? Nothing that dramatic. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the literacy center during its grand opening ceremony. Children filled the entrance holding books and smiling for the camera. In the corner of the image, almost hidden from view, stood Luca watching quietly from a distance. On the back, he had written one sentence. "Sometimes a life changes because someone finally decides to stop and ask if you're all right." Emotion filled my chest as I read the words. Slowly, I looked up at him. Luca smiled. Not the confident smile the city knew. Something warmer. More personal. Then together we watched the sunset fade across the horizon, both understanding the truth at the same time. The phone call lasted less than 30 seconds. The future it created lasted forever.